The Electronic Intifada is an online news site dedicated to covering the Palestinian struggle against Israeli occupation. Founded 24 years ago, it has provided an independent Palestinian perspective on conflicts in the West Bank and Gaza. And during Israel's most recent genocidal assault on Gaza, it has frequently printed reports from those in the enclave, as well as analysis and journalism that challenges the mainstream narrative. But now it looks like it might be being punished for it. Electronic Intifada co founder and executive director Ali Abunimah has been arrested by the authorities in Switzerland after he arrived in the country to speak at an event in Zurich on Saturday. Abunimah, who is an American citizen, is reportedly being held under suspicion of violating a Swiss entry ban, justifying the decision to arrest him, or attempting to justify the decision to arrest him. The head of Zurich's Department for Security said this: "We do not want an Islamist Jew hater who calls for violence in Switzerland." Plenty of prominent people, however, don't recognize that description of Abunimah. Irene Khan, the UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression and Opinion, said this: shocking news, Switzerland is a member of Freedom Online Coalition. I urge to urgently investigate and release Ali Abunimah of Electronic Intifada. This was UN Special Rapporteur on Palestine, Francesca Albanese. So she said this: I share the shock and urge for a prompt investigation into this matter. The climate surrounding freedom of speech in Europe is becoming increasingly toxic, and we should all be concerned. This was the reaction of activist and journalist Aaron Mate, who received the news of Abunimah's arrest while speaking at a Palestine event in Toronto.
Very upset to hear that Ali's been detained. I'm not surprised, though, because Ali's been at the forefront of calling out the complicity of European states in the genocide in Gaza. And so the fact that he's being arrested now in Zurich is not surprising. Also following so many other crackdowns in Europe. Like, what is it about Europe deciding to carry on the Nazi tradition in the service of today's Nazis? So I'm reminded of that doctor from Gaza. I'm sorry his name escapes me, but the very well-known one who went recently to try to... Yes. Who was arrested, or was prevented from entering the country to deliver lectures that he was invited to. I mean, this is the face of Europe right now. It's so abhorrent. And so, free Ali Abunimah.
Mate is right about the clampdown on those who assert the right of Palestinians to resist occupation. Prominent Palestinian surgeon Ghassan Abu Sitta was detained and then expelled from Germany in April last year after travelling to the country to speak at a conference. A month later, he was denied entry to France after he was invited to speak at the country's Senate and told that a Schengen travel ban had been placed on him by Germany. And last year, British authorities arrested several journalists under the Terrorism Act, including Electronic Intifada contributor Asa Winstanley. And yet, while journalist Ali Abunimah is treated like a criminal by the Swiss authorities, the country seems pretty welcoming of those who've overseen a genocide. This was Israeli President Isaac Herzog speaking at the World Economic Forum's annual conference in Davos this week. He, of course, escaped Switzerland consequence-free. That's despite the fact that while Herzog mingled with billionaires in the luxury ski resort, the Swiss Attorney General received several criminal complaints against Herzog, accusing the president of inciting genocide. Helena, this seems pretty shocking, doesn't it? I mean, because I think also they gave this guy permission to speak in Switzerland and then arrested him there, which, I mean, it'd be shocking however they did it, but I mean, it's pretty awful.
Well, what's that you can hear? What's that you can hear, by the way? Oh, that's the total silence of the right-wing free speech brigade on this one. Complete radio silence in terms of genuine repression of free speech. The state cracking down on people for voicing their support of Palestinians, for making arguments in favor of Palestinian resistance to occupation. The Free Speech Brigade, totally silent on this. They're too busy talking about people having their Twitter accounts deleted for violating the terms of service, or I guess that's not really a thing nowadays in the world of Elon Musk. Although, to be fair, you can't say cisgender on Twitter anyway, so that is beyond the point. Anyway, it's just, I find this level of hypocrisy that you see in that free speech is an important cornerstone of a lot of our societies. And in terms of political speech, that is something that is extra important that we keep being free. And the crux of where free speech legislation comes in is that it's about the state repression of you. It's about the forces of the state being brought down upon you for the things that you say and the opinions that you express. Whilst loads of people on the right would be absolutely up in arms about someone being quite supposedly cancelled for saying something, which is a social opinion. I've seen very little coverage in these from these supposed free speech warriors about what's happening to people time and time and time again, who having their freedoms taken away from them simply because they are pro-Palestine, simply because they support what is, again, as shown as the duty of people under international law, which is to be able to resist occupation. These aren't people who have expressed support for terrorist groups themselves. These aren't people who've said that I explicitly support XYZ terrorist group, which is illegal. That is an illegal thing for you to be able to do, especially in the EU, where there are even more prescribed groups there than there are in the UK. That's not what these people have done. They have made dispassionate descriptions of things that have happened within the territories in Palestine. This is something that they've done, they've consistently reported on, doing actual real journalism. But because they have opinions that are outside, like the acceptable kind of the imperial core groupthink and what is allowed to be an acceptable opinion, suddenly those free speech rules go out the window, and indeed the supposed warriors for free speech immediately avert their eyes and they refuse to comment on such things. When, of course, they have got plenty of denouncements for broad support for Palestine. In fact, this has been something I've seen from a lot of these free speech types, quote unquote, is that their overriding sense is that actually we shouldn't be having pro-Palestine protests. These are hate marches, for example. We should be cracking down on the rights of people to protest, which is free expression within a democracy. So again, there may be obviously plenty of outliers to this, but this is a broad trend that I've personally noticed, that you don't ever see this level of defense for what is state crackdown on people's genuinely held opinions, and especially ones in which might implicate especially European states in being supportive of, international war crimes committed by Israel, or the EU's diplomatic backing for the continued decades-long occupation, illegal occupation of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank and of Palestine in general. It's interesting how as soon as your opinions are outside of Western policy groupthink, suddenly states are very happy to crack down on your opinions.
I mean, this is personally why I think the situation whereby being seen to support a militant group, a militant resistance group in another country is illegal. Like I don't like Hamas, right? I also don't like the IDF. But in this country, you can say yay IDF and you can't say yay Hamas. And that to me seems, that doesn't seem logical, right? Well, it seems logical if what you want to do is sort of put the weight on the scales in favor of Israel when it comes to sort of public discourse and reporting. But the idea, I mean, Hezbollah is now the same, isn't it? That you sort of, when you speak about Hamas and when you speak about Hezbollah, you have to speak about them in a completely different way to the IDF because there are legal ramifications. I think that's wrong. I should say, I don't know why this man was arrested. I don't know, if it has anything to do with Hamas, but lots of these cases seem to be the state saying, we suspect you of glorifying terrorism. And when they say glorifying terrorism, they mean saying something in favor of the Palestinian militant resistance. And to me, that shouldn't be. It shouldn't be courts that decide whether that's right or wrong. That should be a matter for sort of public debate. Obviously, if it's like ISIS and it's an organization that's sort of functioning within the UK, then obviously membership of ISIS or membership of Al Qaeda should be, punishable. But expressing support for a resistance movement elsewhere, whose actions we may or may not agree with, seems wrong to me. Helena, any final thoughts from you before we wrap up?
I mean, what I would say is that's why the difference comes in, right? Where you can express the right of people to resist occupation whilst condemning acts they do that are violations of international law. Like, it's very easy to say, well, it's absolutely reasonable for Palestinian resistance groups to attack the military wings that are, again, engaging in a military occupation, a belligerent occupation of your territory. That is their right under international law, and you can say that whether or not you think that is justified, but you can't justify acts of terror against civilians. Like, these are things that you can absolutely. These are some really easy distinctions to make. But within Western canon, within Western discussion of these things, we never talk about the fact that there is a belligerent occupation, there is a military occupation, and there is justification in engaging in military targets. We never talk about this. So to the point where of the piece before, you would see all of the journalists in this country, a lot of the news organizations were describing the release of Israeli hostages from Gaza. Well, these people weren't hostages that were released. These were prisoners of war. They were soldiers who were captured from military bases. Like, they're not hostages, they're prisoners of war. Whilst there were civilian hostages, and obviously that's a war crime and should be roundly condemned by everybody, but prisoners of war are not hostages. These are two separate things. And yet you talk about Palestinian captives with no prisoners when there's been no trial, there's been no due process, no charge. They've just been black bagged off the streets by an occupying military force for being for the crime of being the wrong ethnicity, potentially. I don't know. And then they get described as prisoners being released in a swap, and yet military prisoners of war get described as hostages who have been freed by an agreement through the ceasefire. Yeah, this is the two sides reporting together, or two-tier reporting and two-tier discussion of the Israel-Palestine conflict that you see, which isn't based in international norms. And this is where the liberal democratic order will break down, is if we only apply the rules to other people and we apply the freedoms to our friends.